Good afternoon, everyone, and we are back for our 8th and final session of the 2020 Virtual Cultural Competency Conference, Policy, Practice, and Innovation in Mental Health and Addiction. As we heard on evidence-based models, innovations, and customizations that are being supported around the community, and also looked at new and novel practices, we are concluding today with tactical applications on direct provider and client interactions. Leading us is Carrie Sheward, VP of Clinical Services from Tangram Way, and Megan Lauman, Special Projects from Tangram Way. Carrie and Megan were both presenting speakers in our Technical Assistance webinar series, focusing specifically on disability. We welcome them again and have them join us for today's proactive strategies for preventing difficult behavior when interacting with our mental health and addictions clients. First off, an introduction on Carrie Sheward. Carrie began her career in the area of community employment services in 1991. She worked for a community mental health center in various capacities, with the majority of her time spent in crisis services for individuals with severe and persistent mental health diagnoses. Carrie changed her course in 2013 when her son was diagnosed with autism. She returned to college and earned a graduate degree in psychology with a specialization in applied behavioral analysis. She became board certified by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board and worked as a program manager and then clinical director for a large autism provider. While developing community connections and educating public entities, Carrie learned of the services Tangram was providing. She joined the Tangram team as Vice President of Clinical Services in 2019 and oversees the current behavior programs, while also identifying ways to expand programming. Carrie and her husband live in Noblesville and share 8 children, 3 daughters-in-law, and 1 granddaughter, with 1 more on the way. Megan Lauman, a master's of social work, is a licensed social worker, life coach, and behavioral consultant with Tangram Life Coaching. She has extensive experience in serving at-risk children and young adults and uses her expertise to help individuals with disabilities gain the tools they need to achieve their personal goals. Tangram Life Coaching was created to serve individuals with hidden or mild disabilities and other barriers who otherwise may not qualify for other support services. Tangram Life Coaching partners with mental health providers to address the needs of our clients with mental health issues as part of our holistic approach to serving those with disabilities and other barriers to success. Megan, Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to transition the presentation screen over to you. That is being passed now. Great, we see your PowerPoint slide.
There we go.
Great. We turn it over to you. Right. Thank you both.
Thank you. We accept the handoff. Hi, I'm Carrie Sheward, and I'm here with
Megan Lauman.
We are discussing pretty much what we do every day in our role here at Tangram. As behavior clinicians, we work on positive behavior supports and these proactive strategies, which are so important in working with any individual, regardless of diagnoses, no diagnoses. They're just very effective strategies in dealing with people in general. Educators use them in the classroom. Hopefully they're able to generalize across environments. So these are some of the strategies and tools that we use to prevent challenging behaviors from occurring. As parents, Megan and I try and use them frequently, not often successfully, but so they happen before behavior occurs to decrease the likelihood of that behavior or negative behavior that we don't want to see happen, or lessens the intensity of that when it's going to happen. Sorry, my cue. So how can you be proactive? So you need to prompt or teach proactive strategies to decrease the likelihood of these behaviors from occurring. So the behavior unfortunately has to occur for you to identify what was happening prior to that. Often you'll hear people say, no, I don't know what happened. They just got upset and punched me. Well, something happened. It might not be very obvious, but there was an antecedent to that behavior occurring. So identifying what that antecedent is, what are the triggers, what might be happening in the environment, and then looking at those things, being very specific, looking at the setting, the temperature, maybe the room was too cold, it was too warm, there were sounds. Sometimes the sounds are not even audible to you or I. They might be very high frequency. They might be a specific individual that is a trigger. So looking at all of the possibilities. One area that we often isn't obvious unless a family member or the person tells us is lack of sleep. So I know I am not the nicest person when I don't get my sleep. So an individual might be more likely to engage in refusal or aggression. They haven't had a lot of sleep or a good night's sleep. So you can kind of manipulate that by having a set bedtime, adhering to that, planning ahead, making sure it's a quiet environment. They get their healthy dose of melatonin or whatever it is that helps that person sleep, a little lavender oil. That can be a proactive strategy for future occurrences of sleep deprivation, induced aggression, things like that. So looking at these antecedents is super important. So we're looking at being proactive versus reactive. So when you are proactive, you are taking responsibility. You're identifying, okay, I'm feeling this way. This is what's coming next. Taking the initiative. As behavior clinicians, we like to, step up as a leader and influence how they react to certain situations. So being reactive is more influenced by other people and circumstances, not taking responsibility, not taking the initiative to look ahead of the behavior that's coming down the pike. There are various types of proactive strategies. We're going to look at some of those, but the biggest thing is in being proactive is taking responsibility for your behavior. So the individual in each scenario needs to be an active participant, because you will not always in your lifetime have a behavior clinician. You will not have a parent, a teacher, that person that's going to say, hey, it's going to get loud in here. You need to put your headphones on. Or, if you don't go to sleep tonight, then tomorrow when you're in class, you're not going to want to participate and you might end up in the principal's office. So it's important to work with the individual so they can take responsibility and learn how to implement these practice strategies themselves. You don't want to jump in and start teaching this right after the behavior occurs. So when someone engages in physical aggression or something, you don't want to, the minute they sit down and are calmed down, go, so I noticed this happened, but this is what you could have done. Give it a little time, talk about some different things. How did your body feel right before this happened? Those sorts of discussions can occur. Work with that person on identifying whatever the trigger is for that specific behavior. That increases their ability to modify their behavior on their own. They don't need someone, prompting them all the time. On with the show. So looking at some more proactive strategies. One is, oh, sorry, Megan's going to jump in.
So the number one proactive strategy is you. Your tone of voice, your body language, your volume, and your facial expressions. Those are huge when you're interacting with people, especially if they're coming in kind of heightened or in that fight or flight. If these don't match, it can be confusing. So if you have your arms crossed, but you're using a very soft tone of voice, that can communicate different things. Your tone of voice communicates that maybe you're welcoming, but your arms crossed may communicate that you're closed off or maybe a little bit threatening. One of my famous examples of this is I had a staff that worked with a client who the staff was very demonstrative with his hands. He talked a lot with his hands. He had a very loud voice, and the client kept hitting him. And it wasn't because the staff was doing anything wrong. The staff was reacting to the volume of his voice and his hands waving around, because what he was trying to do was help the client do dishes or laundry or things like that. But the client didn't see or didn't hear those words. He was just seeing the volume of the voice, hearing the volume of the voice, and his hands waving around, and the client would turn around and hit him. So I really had to work with that staff on bringing his volume down of his voice, not waving his hands around as much. And once he was able to do those things, he stopped getting hit. And clients will react to what you're communicating to them through your nonverbals. Are you rolling your eyes? Are you looking at them? Are you paying attention to your phone versus looking at them? Or you know, what are you communicating with all of your nonverbal communication?
So this is kind of timely, and it just hit me as Megan was talking about that. Now that all of us are used to Zoom calls and Zoom meetings and GoTo meetings, our facial expressions are so important. You're in that meeting and you're bored or something else is going on and you're rolling your eyes and you're looking at your phone and you're doing other things, and everyone else, your audience, sees that, or whoever is speaking. So you have to be very cognizant of how you're coming across non-verbally. So I think we've all kind of stepped up our game that way.
So the number one proactive strategy, or the number two after you, is respecting and listening. You may have to look for the things that the client is telling you. You know, if you have somebody that is squinting their eyes or maybe keeps shifting in their chair, they may be communicating to you that they're uncomfortable. Is it too bright on that side of the table? Is the sun in your eyes? Would you like to move? Is that chair uncomfortable for you? Validate concerns and emotions. Don't brush aside fears or tell them not to worry. Their emotions are very valid and very real, so validate those. And for a lot of our clients, everybody that we work with has some type of developmental disability. So oftentimes they're, unfortunately, by parents, teachers, therapists, clinicians, are told how they feel. Yeah. And so giving them the opportunity to express how they feel, whether that's through a visual or through words, is really big. And I always say when I'm training new employees, nobody in the history of the world that's been told to calm down has calmed down. That's a very invalidating feeling, because to that person, even though it may be small to you, to that client, to that individual, it is something big. And they need to hear that it's okay that it's big. When you're asking questions, I know as clinicians and as therapists, we're always told to ask open-ended questions. Something to be aware of: people who are maybe having a mental health crisis, and especially people with developmental disabilities, open-ended questions are often too broad. So you kind of have to find the balance between open-ended and closed-ended questions. So give them the name for the emotions that they might be feeling. Did you feel angry or sad when John took your coat? Instead of saying, how did you feel when this happened? Give them some of those options. And once again, using visuals may also be beneficial. They may not be able to give you the word of how they're feeling, but they may be able to look at a picture or a face and be able to point to how they're feeling. And reflection. Always seek clarification on what you're hearing, but also, once again, with developmental disabilities, because that's kind of our area, they may have communication difficulties. So look for body language, eye contact, and facial expressions to gain understanding. A really great way for people who maybe have some limited verbal skills is ask them to show you, or ask them to do, step-by-step of what you have said, so that you can kind of make sure that they gain that understanding. Something to be aware with reflection too, I know as a clinician, I was always taught to kind of repeat back the words that the client said. I've worked with several clients that find that very offensive, because they feel like they're repeating themselves. And so you sometimes have to be creative in the way that you reflect back, but it's not exactly the same thing that they said. Or you say something like, I want to understand what you're saying. So is this what you said? And I will turn it back over to Carrie.
All right, so evaluating the task. So if you're in a situation where you're asking someone to do, say you're in a group living situation, in a classroom setting, you're an employer, you're any variety of situations like that, evaluate the task. And Megan gives a great example of knowledge of tasks, which I'll let her do in a moment. But think about it, if you are placing a demand or a particular activity must be completed, identify what steps might lead to a challenging behavior, modify what absolutely has to be done, allow the person to take control and kind of determine what order those things have to be done in, offer breaks, give choices, give that person the control over the task, and that kind of lessens the likelihood of maladaptive behaviors. Homework, I gave an example, but I'm gonna have Megan jump in with her beautiful example in a minute. But so if you have to do homework, your kiddo's at home, let them choose. Do you want to do your beautiful art picture that you have to turn in tomorrow, or your algebra problems? I personally would probably get the algebra out of the way, but that person can take control and do what they want to do first, and that way they, you know, it might ease, or they might want to ease into what they have to do that they dislike later. Just leave it up to them. Tell your story about the washing machine thing.
Oh,
This is my favorite. Sorry, I put her on the spot.
I didn't know
This
which
is a
one
good
she was
one.
talking about. So I didn't put this graphic in here, but if you look up Ross Green, he's got some amazing stuff about working with, he primarily focuses on challenging kids, but it works for everybody. And he really talks about won't versus can't. And so basically, if we're coming at an individual won't do something, we're coming at it from a very judgmental standpoint. If we're coming at it from a can't standpoint, we're looking at barriers, we're looking at skill deficits. And I was working with an individual in his early 20s, big guy, well over 6 feet tall, well over 200 pounds, and knew how to use his demeanor to intimidate people. And one of his goals that had been on there for years, had been on his plan for years, was to do his laundry independently. And he would yell at staff, he would bully them around, and eventually either he would just not do his laundry and wear dirty clothes, or staff would do his laundry for him. We were sitting in a meeting, and once again laundry came up, and he finally yelled out, "I don't know how much soap to put in." He said, "I know how to run the washing machine, I know how to sort my laundry, I know how to work the dryer, I don't know how much soap to put in." In his younger days, he tried to do laundry independently. He was probably 10, 11, 12, and had overflowed the washing machine and had suffered some pretty serious consequences from his parents from that. And so he was afraid that was going to happen again. He was high enough functioning that he was never going to admit that to anybody. So he had a skill deficit, and we were looking at it from very much of a point of he wasn't doing it, he was being defiant, he was trying to bully. He actually had a skill deficit. Once we knew what the skill deficit was, staff went out, bought him laundry pods. He started doing his laundry independently, and it was no longer an issue. And it really empowered him. So had he not spoken up, we would have probably continued to try to do rewards and punishments and things like that to get him to do his laundry. But it wasn't a matter of that. It was a matter of there was a barrier that we had to address. And once we addressed that barrier, then the problem was resolved.
So I think that the moral of the story is always make sure the individual knows all of the steps to what you're asking them to do, and even doing it kind of in an errorless teaching fashion where you show them every little detail ahead of time, not because they're asking. It might be a pride thing. They don't want to tell you, "I don't know how to do this," but just go through it. And if they look a bit confused, make sure that you're asking them the questions. Do you understand this? This is really difficult. Let's try it again. That sort of thing. Another thing to look at, are you studying?
Ready.
Sorry. Another thing to look at is the setting. So what does the environment look like? Is it chaotic? Is it loud? Are there distractions everywhere? This can cause a problem. Some kids can sit in a college dorm room with 500 people around them and music blaring and study just fine. Others have to have headphones on and complete silence. Look at other environmental factors that might impact someone's sensory sensitivities. That can be sound, that can be light. Put some light covers on if your lighting is too bright. You can offer someone sunglasses. These are those proactive strategies that you want the individual to be able to recognize and have the tools with them. So if they're out, they're going to a job site, they're going to shop with a family member, they know, oh wow, I might come across some really bright lighting. I know that really upsets me. I'm going to take my sunglasses with me in my pocket just in case I need it, or I'll grab my headphones. Whatever it is that helps that person get through settings that they might struggle with in a unique environment. Look at where a person is sitting. Are they wearing comfortable clothing? Some people don't like tags. Who's in their visual field? Sometimes it's a specific person that can really trigger some challenging behaviors. So look at everything around that person.
And something, if you're looking at kind of a, not necessarily client-wise, but maybe employee-wise, if you have an individual who has ADHD or something like that, you're not going to want to put their work area in a high traffic area, because people walking past them, doors opening and closing, may be distractible. So once again, looking at, you know, that setting that you're putting them in.
So kind of reverting back to that, the task demands, offer choices whenever you're working with someone. We all like to have the control over situations. So let people choose the order, create a schedule. If an individual is very schedule focused and something changes at the last minute, that can rock their world. So plan ahead. If an activity is going to be canceled, if the state fair, let's go with that one, or the county fairs that none of us are going to be able to attend this summer, if that's something that you do year after year after year, okay, this isn't happening this year. Instead, we're going to do this and plan for next year's great event. You know, work on some alternatives in those situations. Give flexibility to timelines. If someone has to, actually, I was just working with an individual and they had to write an apology letter to someone, and they were really stalling and dragging their feet. One, because it reminded them that they had done something that had offended another individual, but just didn't like that handwriting thing. So you know what? Let them type it. Let them send an email. Let them do it in their own time and say what they want to say. Same with chores. Let someone do a chore the way they want to. I'm horrible at this with my own children. I have to have things done a certain way, but you know what? If they want to pick up one limb at a time instead of loading up a wheelbarrow, let them do it. It'll take them 5 times as long, but as long as they're happy and that's how they have control over it, that's great.
Something you can also do with offering choices is pairing an undesired activity with a desired one. And this is a great way for maybe some of those individuals. We often use it with hygiene issues. As soon as you take a shower, we can go to the store. As soon as you take a shower, we can go to the park. Really kind of pairing those. I don't want to do this, but if I do this, then this next thing that I want to do is going to happen.
Enhance the predictability. So, you know, if they're going to go to a dentist and they're terrified because the last time they went to the dentist, they had a cavity filled, you know, use a social story. We're just going, they're going to do a cleaning. This is what it looks like. If that's not appropriate for whoever you're working with, create schedules. Calendars are great. Some people want a week's calendar, some want a whole month, some want the whole year. Like, I want to know what's going on in my life. That way changes can be noted. You can discuss them in advance. Job site staffing changes. These are a tough one and they're hard to predict because sometimes things happen very quickly. So if a person's working, say at Menards, and their team lead suddenly leaves, you know, it's hard to be proactive with that, but if you can have discussions, especially in jobs that there are frequent changes like that, ahead of time, like, this person is great and you really enjoy going to work with this person, but there's going to be another person that, you know, might take that place. Just to have that discussion started ahead of time might alleviate a little bit of challenging behavior when that actually does occur. Our lovely little pretty pictures. So evaluating the consequence. So we're talking about being proactive and how to kind of look way ahead before behavior occurs, but we also need to look at what happened afterward. When it does occur, how did that person react afterward? Was there remorse? What was their consequence? Did they get what they wanted after they behaved in a negative manner? Case in point, kiddo at the store in the candy aisle, every mom's nightmare, every dad's nightmare. They want the candy, and after about a 10-minute tantrum and everyone in the store looking at the parent, they usually give them whatever they want. Not usually, I shouldn't say that. I've seen some really great parenting lately. But if they do, then they can pretty much guarantee that the next time that they stall before getting it, this tantrum is going to occur again. If they're reinforced for whatever that behavior was, it's likely going to happen again in the future. So we always need to look at our response to a behavior, whether this is physical aggression, property destruction, anything like that. Did our response change? Did we change the way the behavior looked, the topography? Did our response to someone lunging at us result in physical aggression? Did that person refusing escalate because of the way we responded with our behavior? So just looking at that consequence and looking at the environment once again and our behavior, everything that's happening around that individual. And once again, another good time to have that discussion. Look, this behavior occurred, this is what happened afterward.
And in this too, consequence, when we think about consequences, we often think of it being negative and like a punishment. In this sense, it's just what got the behavior to stop. So in the example of the kid screaming in that checkout line for candy, there's one of two consequences that happens. Either the kid gets the candy and they stop screaming, or the kid leaves the store and doesn't get the candy and eventually stops screaming in the car.
Or screams the rest of the night, but that's okay. You can put them in their room and shut the door.
The thing with consequences is actually intermittent reinforcement of behaviors is actually more reinforcing than either always getting the candy or never getting the candy. If that kid sometimes gets the candy, then they're going to be more likely to scream and cry and continue to scream and cry for the candy, versus getting it all the time or never getting it. So that's something when you have multiple staff working with individuals, the staff across the board or the clinicians or whoever's working with that individual need to know, like, this is how I need to respond, and there needs to be a uniform way of responding. So then the behavior can change, because if there's not that uniform way of responding, you may actually see an increase in the behavior because they're going to kind of roll the dice that they're going to get their way. One of the things that is really big about proactive strategies is the environmental adaptations that you can make. One of the big things is reducing fluorescent lighting. Fluorescent lighting, if you have really sensitive hearing, it actually hums. And so for people that are super sensitive, they can hear it hum. It can be very irritating. As fluorescent lights start to go out, they will flicker. And that may not be something that everybody sees. Electronics, TVs, things like that, they all hum. They all emit a high-pitched electronic sound. So for people that have really sensitive hearing, so if you can use natural lighting from windows, things like that, lamps when possible. I know in our office, we switched out to a lot of LEDs because it doesn't quite have the same effect as fluorescent lighting. Having alternative seating options like exercise balls, beanbag chairs, rocking chairs, wiggle seats, things like that, so people can choose what kind of seating they would like. I'm actually, you guys can't see us, but I'm actually laughing because Carrie and I are both in chairs that rotate. And throughout this whole presentation, we have been rotating in our chairs. So having those alternative seating options.
Let's clarify, we're not spinning, we're simply swiveling.
Yes, we're swiveling. Keeping visual stimulation to a minimum. limit wall decorations, pictures, things like that. In especially rooms, if you're dealing with somebody that's easily overstimulated, if there's a lot of art on the wall, a lot of posters, a lot of bright colored paints, things like that, that can be very stimulating to a person. And then having an alternative smaller waiting area for those who are easily overstimulated. This is a great thing. I go to an OT office with a client on a weekly basis, and they actually have a smaller waiting area. So for those individuals that struggle with large groups of people or just need that quiet waiting area, they actually have like a 2-person waiting area for those individuals to go into. That works really well if you know you have 2 clients in that are may have a conflict with each other, that you have an alternative waiting area that they can wait separately. And then having clear written and visual signage directing clients where to go. I know when I'm walking into a new place and I don't know where I'm going, it can be very overwhelming. So having that written, but also that visual signage. If you have a small office, maybe having pictures on the wall and with the room numbers or things like that, so that people can go in, especially for higher functioning individuals, they don't always necessarily want to ask for help. And so allowing them the independence to be able to figure out some things on their own. Boundaries. It's crucial to set appropriate boundaries with your clients. And this is really where you need to know what your agency's policy is on boundaries, know what their crisis procedures are, and what are the expectations after scheduled work hours. We have within our agency, our direct care, when they're off the clock, they're off the clock. Our direct care providers do not give clients their phone numbers, anything like that. When they're done, they're done. Some of us that work on the crisis side of it are available via cell phone, whatever that is. So know your agency's expectations and policies on those boundaries. And know your agency's and or your professional code of ethics standards on self-disclosure. Each agency is a little different. Some agencies will tell you never, ever, ever disclose. I'm a social worker, and so I work off of that code of ethics. So for self-disclosure, it has to be for the clinical benefit of the client and for the clinical benefit of the therapeutic relationship. So that's our standard. Always go back to whatever your agency standard and your professional code of ethics standard on self-disclosure is.
So, in conclusion, plan ahead. Why be responsible? So you can proactively fix your problems. So all of the tools and tricks and tips and things that we talked about today are great ways to manage behavior and things that we work with our clients that we work day to day on identifying these triggers so they can proactively implement the replacement behaviors so that they don't engage in the challenging behavior that we don't necessarily want to see happen. And they don't want to see happen. No one wants to react badly in a situation. There's reasons. And so if we can give them those strategies to use, it's helpful for everybody. Are there any questions?
And there's our contact info.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan and Carrie. We do have a question from Faith Rutland. And Faith asks, as a supervisor, how do you teach the body language and facial expression awareness? As a director of a shelter for victims of domestic violence, she regularly gets complaints, concerns regarding staff and their how they show up in presentation and their mannerisms towards clients.
The best way that I know how to is model. When I am doing, I teach orientation for all of our new employees, and one of the things that I do is I'm showing them, this is what it looks like when you're crossing your arms. This is what it looks like when you are scowling. But a lot of that too, there are other ways that you can do it. You can have people stand in front of a mirror and just look at what their expression looks like and what that would be communicating. A lot of times we don't really realize what we're communicating with the way that, because it's just natural.
If there's someone that has been identified as having a particular facial expression or tone, you can video. That was part of something I did in a prior role, is you would videotape therapists engaging with the various clients, and then they could see, oh wow, I look like I'm doing this, or oh, I like when I did that. But it gives them that particular direct feedback. And then if they don't see it, then you have that hard conversation with them about, this is how your face looks and how it comes across, whether you mean it to or not. So,
and a lot of it is just practice.
mm-hmm.
Thank you, Carrie and Megan. There was a comment earlier about how it's even more important from a telehealth facial expression perspective, since many of our community mental health centers are able to leverage telehealth during this time of COVID-19. What are some specific tactics that you would recommend that our clients, or rather our provider staff members, make sure to exercise when they are interacting through telehealth with clients?
That is hard. And I catch myself doing some of these things. During telehealth sessions, I can get very easily distracted by the stuff around me. So I personally am home with 2 small children. Talk about self-disclosure, but I always have to prep my kids ahead of time. I'm going in. I'm not going to be able to talk to you until I'm done with this session. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Setting my phone across the room, actually, so I'm not tempted to pick it up and answer that phone call. I always make sure that I've closed my email on my computer before I go into a telehealth session, because it's not muted, so they can hear when an email comes up. They may not be able to tell. And then I'm less tempted to like open that email and want to look at it or know what's going on. So I think those are the big things. If you're uncomfortable with a computer screen, this is actually something that we teach our individuals who have autism when they're doing job interviews. If you have to look away from the screen, find a point on the wall in front of you to look up to and then come back down. That way it's not really obvious that you're looking away from the client or away from the screen. You're still focused on the screen, but you're able to move your eyes to a different focal point and then come back.
It has been, I mean, I think it's very eye-opening because you are on that small screen in that box. And when you're doing face-to-face therapy, you can kind of, you know, your eyes can wander around the room and look at different things, maybe gaze out the window. But when you're trying to engage someone virtually, you really have to focus, you know, on that screen. So it's been a learning curve for sure.
Okay, thank you. We have got a few minutes left for questions. So if you have additional questions or comments for Carrie and Megan, please feel free to chat them into the question pane. And Carrie and Megan, as we were going through our earlier webinars, there was quite a bit of conversation regarding self-disclosure, motivational interviewing, of course, the trust and relationship building with each interaction. You mentioned earlier that really having those tactics utilized and come together. Could you go back to that particular slide of the most proactive resources?
You mean the one about you? Let me get back there. Are you talking about this one?
The tone of voice, etc. one. Mm-hmm.
That your most proactive strategy is you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
That
Thank you. Yes. So questions regarding this, because it seems like this particular slide has the most questions coming in. So as you look at this, where your most proactive strategy is the provider staff member interacting, what are some key things about cultural differences and personal space differences in preference? How do you teach personal space barriers?
For the client or for the clinician?
For the clinician.
Okay. Well, I guess they would kind of work with both. When I'm teaching personal space barriers, I talk a lot about a bubble. And so if I'm working with somebody who maybe has a different cultural background, sometimes I'll use visuals, like a hula hoop or something like that. Hula hoop tends to give a pretty comfortable American space of personal space. And so really thinking about that hula hoop around you, and that's about how far away you want to stay from somebody. It's also a great way to teach clients. I've done that a couple of times where we put hula hoops on the floor and they move around in the hula hoops and try not to bump into each other. But I think that is where there has to be a cultural awareness on the clinician's part, that either the culture that I'm coming from or the culture that they're coming from is very different. With our specific population, personal space is a big thing. We have a lot of people that violate personal space. So just because they just don't recognize those boundaries because of their disability. So we work a lot with having them get clarification. Are you comfortable? How far away do I need to stay from you? Or how close are you comfortable with me getting to you?
I think
so that's,
we have a lot of diversity within our clinic, and we do cultural diversity trainings, which are so good. And it helps us as clinicians going out, for working with a family with a different culture, just have those discussions. What is traditional in your culture? What is the body language? Eye contact sometimes is a sign of disrespect in certain cultures. Just learning about that culture and then adapting how you interact. I think we all do that on a daily basis, or should.
Well, and I think a great example of that was the family that you went and interviewed with, the ghost one. Yes.
I was interviewing a family and I didn't really know the background very well. And their belief system was of a different religious belief. We'll just go with that just to be vague. And some of the things they were saying, it was very kind of off-putting at first, and then they mentioned, oh, we are, this is our belief system, this is historically where you come from, and it's like, oh, and everything made sense then. So getting to know that person's history is super important when you're interacting with a family. I didn't want to get very specific just to not violate their privacy because it's pretty specific, but yeah, just learning that history is important.
Fantastic. And then Lisa Boyle asks, what can you say about giving compliments as part of the trust building and relationship building? Are these effective with clients?
Yeah, that's actually something that I cover quite a bit. And I, especially with my clients, I'm all about praise when it's warranted. Just about everybody knows when you're blowing them smoke. And so if it's warranted, a lot of our clientele that we serve at Tangram, they hear a lot about the bad stuff that they do, and they don't get to hear a lot about the good stuff or the things that they've learned or things like that. So I really work with staff on how do we give compliments? How do we give praise? Because that is a very reinforcing thing. You tell somebody that they did something right, that maybe it's the first, second, third time that they've done it correctly, or it's the first time they've ever heard that they've done it correctly, you'll see their face light up. And there's really a trust that kind of builds with that you really care about me and you're not just there to tell me what to do or what I'm doing incorrectly.
And behavior specific.
Yeah.
What was it that I did right? And what did you like about it? And that sort of thing shows them that, wow, you were really paying attention to what I was doing. And they appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Kind of a really, and something to also clarify that, you don't want to clarify it with instead of doing this.
Mhm.
We had 2 clients that are roommates that were arguing, and one of them's typical reaction would be to hit. And so he said, "Get out of my face." Wasn't necessarily the best reaction, but he didn't hit. So we were able to say, wow, I really liked how you used your words, and then redirect him into something else and away from his roommate. But if we had said, I really like how you use your words and didn't hit, the next thing he would have done would have hit, because then it's like, oh wait, that's an option, that's a choice. So you really want, when you're praising, to make sure that you're stopping at the praise and don't continue with the instead of doing whatever that negative or target behavior is.
Great points and great illustrations of the visual context for not only the interactions and reactions that we should be sharing with our staff, but also how we can use compliments and complimentary language to encourage our clients as well. Great, we see a couple more comments and questions being typed in. And as we wait for those to come through, Carrie, Megan, any additional tactics or any additional items you would like to share specifically on self-disclosure?
I mean, both, well, it's on your bio.
Yeah.
Both Carrie and I have neurodiverse children, we'll just put it that way. And I'm very careful when I disclose that, because there are certain people that don't need to know that,
Mhm.
but there's certain parents, and it's not something that I disclose immediately, but it's definitely something, if I'm working with a parent and they're really struggling with something, that for me to say, you know what, I have a neurodiverse child too. And so I've been in your shoes. I know how frustrating it is. And also to be able to say, and I don't get it right all of the time. So that's some of the self-disclosure that I will do, but that is very rare. I don't know about you, Carrie.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes with disclosure like that, that can help with the parent to be able to form a connection with you. But that's about all. That's about my extent of what I self-disclose.
Yeah. I think it's really important to keep that boundary pretty well defined when you're dealing with individuals. You don't have to be cold and callous and
yeah,
I'm not a person, but yeah, kind of limit that personal stuff.
I think it's very accurate to look at the comfort level of that disclosure, and then also ensuring that it's relevant in sharing with clientele, and how that then may or may not make it more difficult between the professional boundaries. So thank you for sharing that.
In with self-disclosure, you have to be aware that you can inadvertently self-disclose. Like if you have an office and you have a family picture in your office, that's self-disclosure. If you have, whether it's intentional or not. And so those are things to be aware of. And one of the things when I was actually researching this, I highly suggest you Google yourself, because that is also inadvertent self-disclosure. So, what's showing up on your Twitter account that's Googleable, what's showing up on your Facebook, if you have blogs out there that are Googleable, that's all self-disclosure, and people are super savvy these days. They can get a lot of information. So really check, as far as that's concerned, of what's out there. That's public knowledge.
Great recommendations, especially as we come back to our clinics and office locations here, coming our return to work status with the back on track from COVID-19. So much of our experiences have been done online. And as we do online, when we are presenting at webinars, when we are participating, depending on the security levels of those interactions, that those can be shareable. So please do utilize the tactics that Megan and Carrie have recommended today and ensure that you know what your online self is disclosing as well. Well, Megan, Carrie, in the last 10 minutes of the session and also in the last 10 minutes of our conference overall, I'd like to thank you both for sharing with us very tactical approaches and proactive strategies of how we as staff and providers can continue to improve our interactions and our trust building relationships through the betterment of our own behavior and our body language, and of course the additional tactics that you shared to ensure that we're preventing difficult behaviors. Thank you both so much for your time today. We appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, all, thank you again for your time.